"Sir, you're not on the list." That's what the guard said. Not with malice, just procedure. But those words hit like a door slamming in my chest. 250 guests, music loud enough to rattle the windows, laughter echoing across manicured lawns. And yet, somehow, no space for me. Not even a seat. Not even a name on a clipboard. I told him I was David's father. He looked at me like I'd said I was the gardener. That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was my place now. Outside, watching. The ornamental iron gates, a filigree of frozen night against the emerald lawn, spoke volumes of Leo's wealth, a fact I'd already surmised. A guard, poured into a suit straining at its seams, intercepted me. "Name," he clipped, his tone a monotone wall. "Arthur Penhaligon," I stated. The name felt foreign on my tongue, a relic from a life fading into whispers. He ran a thick digit down a roster on his clipboard. The air, thick with the cloying sweetness of forced blooms and a sharp chemical undercurrent, tightened the knot in my stomach. Not anger, but the weary acceptance of a preordained truth. I was unseen. "I'm David's father," I announced, adding an edge to the declaration. The guard's eyes flickered over me, cataloguing. He saw an old man, likely adrift in a sea of curated elegance and exorbitant attire. He saw through the facade, recognized a ghost. "Hold on," he grunted, keying his lapel radio. "We've got a discrepancy at the portal. Claims he's David's father. Name's Arthur Penhaligon." Static erupted, followed by a garbled voice. He listened, brow furrowed in concentration. Releasing the button, he faced me, a faint flush of unease coloring his cheeks. "Right this way, sir. Mr. Lancaster will receive you." He swept a hand toward the entrance, and I proceeded, each footfall weighted with the past. Inside, the celebration roared. Music blared, laughter pealed, and conversations buzzed like frantic bees. Crystal pendants showered light on the scene, reflecting in the turquoise expanse of the pool, where revelers shrieked and splashed. The opulence was breathtaking, almost obscene. I remembered another party, decades prior, David's 5th birthday. A modest gathering in our humble garden. A store-bought cake, leaning slightly, adorned with his favorite cartoon characters. Balloons bobbed from the branches of the old apple tree. Children raced, faces painted with chocolate glee. That world was gone, a faded photograph in an album. I drifted to the periphery of the throng, a stranger in a strange land. Faces, unfamiliar and guarded, swam before me. I searched for David, for Thomas, my grandson, but found only a blur of designer clothes and practiced smiles. A memory surfaced. David, a boy of 7, his small hand gripping mine. We walked toward the park in the long shadows of late afternoon. He prattled on about something, words tumbling in his eagerness. The details elude me now, but the warmth of his small hand, the boundless trust shining in his eyes, that remains. At the park, he bolted towards the other children, his joyous cries echoing. I sat on a bench watching, suffused with a contentment so complete it bordered on ache. A happiness I suspected, even then, was fleeting. Back in the present, a server offered champagne. I declined, the effervescence stinging my nostrils. I didn't belong here, hadn't for a long time. Then I saw him. David stood near the pool, encircled by admirers, his laughter cutting through the noise. He looked genuinely happy, and in that instant, a painful clarity descended. He had built a life, a world that excluded me. He had forged his own family, his own connections, and I, the aging, invisible father, was merely an unwelcome spectre of a past he had outgrown. The guard's words resonated, not on the list. Perhaps, I realized, I never truly had been. A multitude pressed in around me, a shimmering, gossiping ocean. I navigated the throng like a phantom vessel, unseen, unheard. David was the quarry, of course, but each hopeful glimpse of dark hair revealed only a younger, sleeker model, sporting a similar, sharp haircut. The sheer audacity of the event stole my breath. The garden, normally a serene green expanse sloping to the water's edge, was unrecognizable. A marquee vast as a dirigible hangar claimed the space, its stark white canvas aglow with kaleidoscopic lights that pulsed like a living heart. Within, the air vibrated with a relentless beat, a thrumming bass that resonated in my bones and set my teeth on edge. I skirted the edge of the celebration, past tables overflowing with culinary creations I couldn't decipher. Ice-sculpted platters of oysters, precarious pyramids of pastel macarons, miniature chocolate masterpieces, opulence unadulterated. A stark contrast to David's 10th birthday. A bouncy castle struggling for space in the backyard, a simple chocolate cake from the local shop, and the joyful mayhem of his schoolmates. Simpler days, maybe better ones. I spied Leo near the marquee's far end, ringed by a knot of children, their faces illuminated by their glowing phones. He was demonstrating some digital feat, his fingers dancing across the screen. Even at this distance, I registered the fierce concentration, the total immersion in the virtual sphere. The impulse to approach, to offer a greeting, flickered, then died. What purpose would it serve? I was an antiquated figure, a hazy silhouette on the fringes of his dazzling screen-dominated existence. The din intensified, a raucous blend of pulsing music, shrieks of laughter, and booming voices, all amplified by the cavernous tent. An abrupt, consuming need for sanctuary washed over me, a longing for a peaceful corner where I could simply draw breath. I noticed a small, deserted patio just beyond the marquee, offering a vista of the river. I gravitated towards it, welcoming the cool air and the comparative quiet. The river flowed onward, a dark, silent witness to the fleeting spectacle. I settled onto a wrought-iron bench, the chilled metal a balm against the party's heat and clamor. Across the water, city lights flickered like a scattering of diamonds on black velvet. I wondered about David, if he even registered my presence. Doubtful. He was likely consumed with his role, the consummate host, charming, influential guests, ensuring seamless execution. I closed my eyes, attempting to shut out the noise, the spectacle, the sheer everything. My own birthday loomed, a few short weeks away, a quiet pint at the local, most likely, perhaps a card from Margaret next door, a world away from this lavish display. A waiter materialized, proffering a flute of champagne. I declined with a shake of my head. No, thank you. He shrugged, melting back into the boisterous crowd. I watched him recede, feeling a prickle of something unnameable, melancholy maybe, or simply weary resignation. Opening my eyes, I gazed at the river. The current surged, relentlessly pulling everything forward. I felt that pull myself, swept along by an inexorable tide of change. David was out there, caught in the flow, thriving in this modern world. And I remained here on the bank, watching him drift further, knowing I could never truly rejoin him. The realization sharpened with each passing second. I no longer belonged here. I no longer belonged in David's life. A relic of a bygone era, a faded snapshot in a digital scrapbook. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to acknowledge that truth. Leo, enthroned on a vibrant heap of gifts, attacked one with a wolfish hunger. Another device, a brighter screen. Another step away. I lingered by the patio's edge, nursing lukewarm lemonade. The sinking sun painted the immaculate lawn with elongated, spectral shadows, an echo of the emptiness within me. A triumphant cry erupted as he hoisted a new gaming system. David, the ever-doting father, tousled Leo's hair, his smile a blend of pride and something else, a subtle ease, perhaps, that the paternal performance was playing out flawlessly. My gaze wandered to the expansive green. It hadn't always been this sculpted expanse. Once it was smaller, a riot of weeds, an unruly patch clinging to our modest semi-detached, complete with its peeling paint and perpetually damp shed. But it was ours. And there, on that patch, a different show unfolded years ago. I pictured David, a miniature, unsteady figure astride a cherry-red bicycle. Training wheels rasped on the uneven ground, scattering tiny dust clouds. His face, a study in concentration, burned crimson. I knelt beside him, my hand a feigned anchor on the seat's back, pretending control. "Ready, Davy?" The question rasped, thick with an emotion I couldn't then name. scarcely grasped now. Hope, maybe. Hope against a fall. Hope for soaring. Hope to somehow shield him from life's inevitable stumbles. He nodded, trust shining in his young eyes. Ready, Dad. Then I released him. A wobble, a moment of stark panic. Then, against all odds, balance. He pedaled with ferocious energy, tiny legs pistons pumping, a grin of pure victory splitting his face. I ran alongside, hollering encouragement, my heart near bursting. He conquered the lawn's length, a distance then seeming monumental, a tribute to his grit and my, what? Faith? The naive conviction I could steer him, mold him, prepare him for the unknown. Leo's renewed shriek snapped me back. A drone, sleek and obsidian, capable of filming from impossible heights, broadcasting existence. David was deep in explanation, his voice alight with shared fascination. They spoke in code, algorithms and bandwidth, likes and followers, a dialect I neither understood nor desired to decipher. The sun kissed the horizon, igniting the sky in a canvas of orange and violet, a breathtaking display unnoticed by the revelers. The music swelled, the laughter sharpened, the air vibrated with the energy of a generation I'd outgrown. I drained the lemonade, its saccharine sweetness sickly on my tongue. It tasted of longing, of second guesses, of the stark truth that the hand I once gripped so fiercely had slipped loose, leaving me on the lawn's periphery, watching son and grandson recede into an uncharted landscape. The crimson bike rusted in the shed for years afterwards. Should have tossed it. Probably. David's eyes met mine across the expanse. He raised his glass in a silent cheer. I mustered a feeble return. He likely took it for happiness, for pride. He wouldn't see the weariness. Weary of charades. Weary of trying to close the chasm. Weary of being the ghost at my own grandson's celebration. I turned, heading for the gate. The security guard, barely past adolescence, offered a cursory nod. He didn't recognize me, didn't know my story. Why should he? Just another old man, stealing away from the festivities. As I walked homeward, the party sounds softening behind me, a strange lightness settled over me, a sense of absolution. The hand had slipped away. Yes, but perhaps release was the answer. Perhaps it was time to accept the finished act, the nearing end of the story. And maybe, just maybe, that was all right. The roses, vibrant even as autumn encroached, offered a silent invitation. I edged away from the party's boisterous energy, a twinge in my back accompanying each step, the amplified music throbbing like a persistent headache. Before me, the meticulously kept lawn sprawled, a tapestry of preppy attire and designer fabrics, the atmosphere saturated with grilled fare and cloying perfume. What I craved was fresh air, the drowsy murmur of bees, the rich essence of moist earth. Nearing the rosebed, I spied a small wrought-iron bench tucked into a secluded nook. Though slightly dewed, I settled onto it. The faint chill was a welcome contrast to the feverish activity behind me. From this vantage, the celebration resembled a lively abstract canvas, individual forms merging into a single, animated entity. My gaze found Leo, my grandson, a miniature David, encircled by a covey of youngsters, their faces illuminated by a tablet's glow. The irony stung. A tribute to existence, powered by the very technology that appeared to be leeching it away. A burst of laughter, brittle and sharp, pierced the evening air, emanating from a knot of men near the makeshift bar, their voices booming with confidence. At first indistinct, snippets drifted toward me as the breeze shifted. Jakarta deal nearing completion. Geneva next week. Stock options. The lexicon of a realm beyond my grasp now, a world of transactions and acquisitions, of private aviation and discreet bank accounts. David navigated it with effortless ease, a world I'd never quite managed to infiltrate. Always driven, my son, always reaching. I recalled pushing him on that bicycle, the wind tousling his hair, pure, unadulterated joy lighting his features as he mastered balance. That joy now felt like a distant echo, supplanted by a determined gleam in his eyes, the rigid set of his jaw. A closer voice, a woman's, laced with cutting disdain, startled me. She was engaged in a phone call. Honestly, darling, the catering is simply awful. And the music, utterly ghastly. I told David he should have engaged. Her words trailed off, fading as she moved further afield, yet they lingered, stinging like barbs. This was David's domain, his fete, his carefully constructed facade of success. And I was merely a forgotten heirloom, a silent spectator on the fringe. I sank back against the bench's cool metal, closing my eyes. The rose's heavy scent enveloped me, an almost sickeningly sweet perfume. It evoked memories of Margaret, my wife. She adored roses, dedicating countless hours to tending them in our modest garden. We lacked extravagant caterers or globe-trotting acquaintances. Our life was unpretentious, peaceful, filled with the unassuming joys of family and a cherished home. Margaret would have adored Leo. She would have doted on him, regaled him with tales, filled his imagination with visions of far-off lands and gallant knights. She would have perceived the boy behind the screen, the flicker of inquisitiveness that even technology couldn't quite extinguish. A surge of loneliness welled up, an old ache in my chest. I yearned for her, missed her presence, her quiet sagacity, her unwavering affection. She would have known the appropriate words, how to bridge the chasm between generations, how to remind David of authentic priorities. But she was gone, and I remained here, solitary in a rose garden, enveloped by a reality that felt increasingly foreign. The celebration surged onward, imperious to my presence. I was invisible, a ghost in my own son's narrative. And perhaps, I mused, that was preferable. Perhaps it was time to simply recede into the background, to allow them to pursue their lives, to unburden them from my existence. The sun descended further, painting lengthy shadows across the verdant expanse. The air turned crisper, a tender breeze whispering through the rose bushes. I opened my eyes, surveying the party, the animated faces, the clinking crystal, the vibrant swirl of life. And for the first time, a sense of tranquility washed over me. A quiet acceptance of my position. I was present, yet also detached, and that was acceptable, more than acceptable. It was liberating. The manicured lawn stretched towards the pool, a green stage for David's extravagant spectacle. Colored lights pulsed, mimicking a frantic heartbeat. I'd retreated to a quieter corner, near a rosebush that Margaret had always favored, even though she knew nothing about the breed or how to cultivate them. She just liked the color, a soft apricot that reminded her, she said, of sunsets in Corfu. I inhaled, trying to find a trace of that perfume, but all I got was the cloying sweetness of the caterer's miniature pastries. A high-pitched whine cut through the music. I looked up to see a small drone, all flashing lights and buzzing propellers, wobble precariously in the air before nose-diving into the herbaceous border a few feet away. "Oh, blast it!" Leo, flushed and agitated, came charging over, tripping slightly on the uneven paving. He was wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with some arcane gaming logo, and his perpetually anxious fingers worried at the hem. "Hi, Grandpa," he said, barely glancing at me. "Did you see where it went?" "It seems to have made a rather undignified landing amongst the lavender," I replied, pointing with my walking stick. He scrambled through the foliage, heedless of the snapping stems and disturbed earth. He retrieved the drone, its plastic shell cracked and one propeller hanging limply. "Dad's going to kill me," he muttered, more to the drone than to me. "Perhaps you were flying it too close to the house," I offered, remembering childhood kite disasters of my own. Leo, of course, wouldn't remember those stories. They belonged to a different era, a black-and-white world of penny sweets and ration books. He shrugged. "Maybe. It just lost signal." He fiddled with the controller, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's a new one. Dad got it for me, supposed to be top of the line. And birthdays are like that," I said, leaning on my stick, full of expectations. "The older you get, the more you realize the best presents are the ones you give yourself." He looked up, a flicker of polite but ultimately vacant interest in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess." He paused, then his attention snagged on something over my shoulder. "Oh, cool. They've got the VR set up. Gotta go." And he was gone, a blur of youthful energy, leaving me with the faint scent of lavender and the buzzing echo of the drone's failed flight. My words, like the drone, had crashed and burned, leaving no lasting impact. He hadn't even bothered to thank me. Not that I expected him to, really. I watched him disappear into the crowd, another bright spark drawn to the spectacle. The colored lights seemed to mock me, their relentless pulse a reminder of my own slowing rhythm. The apricot roses, thankfully, remained silent. I wondered if Margaret would have known what to say. She always had a way of connecting with people, of finding a common ground. I suppose that's what made her so special. I'd lost that touch, if I ever had it. Or perhaps the world had simply moved on, leaving me behind in a forgotten corner of the garden. David, a swirl of expensive cologne preceding him, finally detached himself from a cluster of sharply dressed individuals and moved in my direction. It was like watching a ship navigate a crowded harbor, each course correction calculated, each wave a perfectly executed smile. He hadn't actually seen me, not properly, until this moment. More like registered my presence on some internal radar, a blip indicating a familial obligation needed addressing. "Dad, there you are." But the words were warm enough, but his eyes flicked constantly towards the throng he'd abandoned, as if worried they'd disperse and he'd miss some vital transaction of influence. Having a good time? The question hung in the air, devoid of genuine curiosity. It was a conversational gambit, a perfunctory greeting issued more out of duty than concern. I nodded. "Yes, David. It's lively." Lively was an understatement. The bass from the DJ booth throbbed through the floor, vibrating in my bones. The air was thick with the mingled scents of expensive perfume, sweat, and something vaguely chemical emanating from the elaborate cocktails being ferried around by harried-looking servers. It was David's element, a manufactured ecosystem of ambition and aspiration. I was an alien species, ill-equipped to survive in this rarefied atmosphere. "Good, good." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt both familiar and utterly foreign. "Plenty of people here you should meet. Potential investors, some big names in the tech world." He trailed off, his gaze snagging on a woman in a shimmering silver dress, her laughter tinkling like wind chimes. I followed his line of sight. Young, beautiful, and radiating a self-assuredness that seemed almost weaponized. "I'm sure they're all very impressive, David." My voice sounded thin, reedy, easily lost in the cacophony. He chuckled, a dismissive sound. "Impressive is an understatement, Dad. This is where the future is being built. Connections are everything." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "I was just talking to Amelia Vance. Vance Robotics. Huge potential for collaboration. Leo's generation will be working for her one day." He was already halfway gone, his attention pulled back to the glittering surface of the party. I watched him navigate the crowd, a shark circling its prey, his smile widening with each successful encounter. He was a force of nature in this environment, utterly in control, utterly himself. And I was, what? A museum piece. A faded photograph tucked away in a drawer. He paused, a flicker of something, perhaps guilt, perhaps a fleeting memory of a shared past, crossing his face. "Listen, Dad, I should circulate. Make sure everyone's, happy." He gestured vaguely at the swirling mass of bodies. "But grab a drink, relax, enjoy yourself." And then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd, leaving me standing alone in the heart of his manufactured paradise. Enjoy myself. The words echoed in my head, a cruel joke. How could I enjoy myself in a place where I felt so utterly, profoundly irrelevant? I watched him work the room, a master of social choreography, extracting value from every interaction. He was building his empire, brick by brick, connection by connection. And I was just the old man in the corner, a footnote in his success story. The music seemed to grow louder, the lights brighter, the faces more blurred. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to escape, to retreat to the quiet sanctuary of my own home, where the only sounds were the ticking of the grandfather clock and the rustling of the wind in the trees. But I didn't move. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching my son thrive in a world that had left me behind. There was a strange, melancholic peace in accepting my obsolescence, a quiet dignity in acknowledging that I no longer belonged. This was his reality, not mine. And perhaps finally, I was free to let it go. The champagne flutes chimed like a discordant orchestra, each note a tiny fracture in the already crumbling edifice of my ego. David, a master navigator of such gatherings, beamed, his smile a polished mirror reflecting the important faces he sought. He belonged here, amidst this manufactured glitter, while I felt like an intruder, my movements stiff and uncertain. A glimpse of Leo, my grandson, by the towering ice sculpture. A cluster of bright young things surrounded him, their laughter echoing, their clothes screaming affluence. He glowed with youthful assurance. I hesitated, a paternal impulse to connect warring with a sense of being utterly extraneous to his vibrant existence. He wouldn't miss me. Was this the twilight of relevance? Not a vengeful spectre, rattling chains of regret, but a muted presence, acknowledged with polite distraction and swiftly forgotten. I gravitated towards the edge of the terrace, the city lights a scattered diamond field far below. The cool air offered respite from the humid, breathless interior. Leaning on the railing, the chill seeping into my skin, a stark reminder of the tangible reality that persisted despite my fading connection to it. Once, my arrival at these gatherings had been cause for celebration. David, a whirlwind of childish energy and scraped knees, would launch himself into my arms. Leo, barely able to walk, would demand fantastical tales from my lap. Now, those memories seemed like faded tapestries, their vibrant threads bleached by time. I was no longer the anchor, the storyteller, the font of wisdom. I was a footnote, an uninvited observer at a fete celebrating a life I scarcely recognized, a world that had moved on without me. David peeled himself away from a knot of dark suits, approaching with an expression of carefully calibrated concern. "Dad, everything all right? You seem distant." Distant. The word hung there, pregnant with unspoken truths. I longed to articulate the growing abyss between us, the chasm of diverging experiences. I yearned to confess my fears, my anxieties, my sense of utter superfluity, but the words remained locked within me, strangled by years of unexpressed emotion. "I'm fine, David," I managed, my voice a frail echo of its former resonance. "Just enjoying the vista." He nodded, his attention already flickering back to his coterie of admirers. "Good. Well, enjoy the party. Some very influential people here tonight. Important for Leo's trajectory, you understand." And he was gone, absorbed into the sea of well-wishers and power brokers. Watching him vanish, a pang of sorrow resonated within me. I was no longer an active participant, but a mere backdrop in his meticulously constructed narrative of triumph. A wave of profound fatigue enveloped me, an exhaustion that transcended physical weariness. It was the weariness of obsolescence, of accepting one's gradual descent into the shadows. Straightening my back, a spark of defiance flickered to life. I didn't need to remain here, feigning enjoyment at a spectacle that only amplified my isolation. I didn't need to play the role of the supportive patriarch, when the truth was far more intricate, more painful. I flagged down a passing waiter, requesting my coat. Slipping it on, the familiar weight was a small solace against the encroaching despair. I started towards the exit, my pace slow but unwavering. In the grand hall, my gaze crossed with Leo's. He offered a brief, distracted wave, his attention already consumed by his friends and their animated chatter. I returned a weak smile and continued towards the door. It was time to leave. Time to seek refuge in the quiet sanctuary of my own company, where I could finally acknowledge the truth. I was no longer a vital part of their story. I was a peripheral observer, and the celebration was not for me. David was stationed near the veranda's edge, the manicured grounds behind him, his attention monopolized by his phone. A sharp, precise inclination of his head punctuated his speech. "Precisely. Q3 figures. First thing tomorrow." He was an engine of industry, finely tuned and tireless, fueled by pure ambition. I lingered, a shadow in his incandescent realm, until the call concluded with a drawn-out exhale, a sound burdened by quarterly targets, no doubt. "David," I ventured, my voice sounding reedy and distant. He pivoted, the focused executive mask briefly giving way to something akin to familial acknowledgement. "Dad, is everything all right?" The question lacked genuine concern. It was a mere formality. A box ticked. "Yes, all fine," I replied, waving a hand. "Just wanted to let you know I'm leaving." A fleeting expression flickered across his face, perhaps relief, or simply a break from the charade. "Right. Okay. Thanks for coming, Dad." His gaze drifted away, already seeking the next venture, the next alliance, the next step up the corporate ladder. "Happy birthday to Leo," I added, my voice swallowed by the pulsing music. "I'll tell him." Another nod, the same curt, business-like gesture. And that was that. The exchange, on if you could even call it that, was concluded. No embrace, no offer of company, no lingering connection, just a polite farewell, draped in a semblance of filial duty. I turned and walked away, the cumulative weight of my years pressing down. The throng parted around me, faces blurring into a swirling vortex of youth and vitality. I was a phantom ship, passing unremarked in the night. Nearing the entrance, I spotted Leo encircled by his friends, their boisterous energy palpable, faces illuminated by the screens of their devices. He was animated, his eyes alight with happiness, radiating a self-sufficient joy. Her carefree wave was directed at someone disappearing into the crowd. Then it struck me, a realization that stole my breath. He was genuinely happy, utterly, completely content, and that happiness existed independently of me. He had no need for my tales, my counsel, my mere presence. He possessed his friends, his pastimes, his digital existence. He was flourishing, a young tree reaching for the sunlight, while I remained in the shadows, a weathered oak, slowly succumbing to decay. I paused, observing him, a twinge of poignant acceptance churning within me. Not envy, not exactly, but a deep recognition. He was his own person, charting his own course, and I had no place on it. I contemplated saying goodbye, approaching him, forcing an interaction. But to what end? It would be a superficial act, a performance solely for my own benefit, not his. He was already immersed in his sphere, a realm beyond my grasp, beyond my understanding. And so I turned and departed, leaving him to his joy, his companions, his future. Let him have it all. Let him be happy. The security guard, the one who had previously halted me, offered a brief nod as I passed. I returned it, a silent acknowledgement of our shared anonymity. We were both outsiders, observing the spectacle, our roles predetermined, our purpose served. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, a strange sense of liberation washed over me. The weight of obligation, the burden of kinship, had dissipated. I was unburdened, free to recede, to observe, to vanish. Twilight was deepening, and I was ready to welcome its embrace. The car's vast interior amplified the silence on the return trip. David's signature leather scent, usually a reassuring presence, now reeked of forced joviality, like cologne deployed to disguise something stale. Not a syllable had passed between us since leaving the party. What was the point? "Have fun, Dad," David had tossed off, his attention already snagged by the glittering swarm of caterers and tech entrepreneurs spilling onto the immaculate lawn. Fun, as if joy were a faucet you could simply turn on. The house greeted me with its customary tranquility, not an icy hush, but a kind of suspended animation, a patient sentry awaiting my return. A quiet I'd deliberately cultivated, a balm against the incessant clamor, especially the recent cacophony of my son's ascent. I illuminated the living room with a single lamp, its honeyed light bathing the well-worn armchair, my customary perch. Dust motes pirouetted in the beam, a silent, private performance. I approached the liquor cabinet, the latch clicking open with a familiar echo. A generous pour of Macallan 18 followed, the amber spirit swirling in the glass, a captured sunset. This nightly ritual, a solitary salute to bygone days, to echoes of the past, to the twilight hours. Once a measured 2 fingers, now a little more, just enough to soften the sharp edges. Glass in hand, I drifted onto the porch. The evening air, bracing and pure, offered a welcome respite from the cloying atmosphere of David's extravagant affair. The crickets pulsed their tireless serenade, a constant, unwavering rhythm, a grounding force. Overhead, the stars blazed with unaffected grandeur, witnesses to epochs beyond my comprehension. I eased into the ancient rocking chair, its gentle cadence a familiar comfort. The very chair my father had occupied, gazing at the same celestial tapestry. What thoughts had occupied him, I wondered? Had he known this feeling of obsolescence, of being a relic in a world that had accelerated beyond him? The whiskey warmed my throat with its peaty embrace. Out here, beyond the city's glow, the constellations sharpened into focus, revealing their ancient patterns: Orion, the Hunter, and the steadfast beacon of the Big Dipper. I had introduced Leo to these celestial maps years ago, his young eyes wide with wonder. Now Itika, he likely possessed a deeper understanding of algorithmic star charts than the ancient tales that breathed life into them. I swirled the amber liquid, catching the faint stellar light. There was no bitterness, not precisely. More a profound acceptance, a quiet submission to the inevitable order. The young supplant the old, the new eclipses the familiar. It was the world's enduring rhythm. David flourished in his milieu. Leo was already fluent in a language I struggled to grasp. And I was morphing into a spectre in their lives, a doddering elder dispensing awkward embraces and antiquated counsel. The drink finished, its warmth now spreading through me. The crickets maintained their unyielding chorus. The stars continued their indifferent vigil. Closing my eyes, a peculiar serenity enveloped me, a sensation akin to liberation. I was free to simply exist, to observe, to recede. The house's quiet no longer felt like oppression, but a sanctuary, a refuge from the din and the ambition, a place for solitude, for memories, for the quiet dignity of a life drawing toward its close. The quiet after David's party possessed a different quality, a stillness beyond mere absence of sound. It was the evaporation of expectation. For years, I'd held a subconscious vigil anticipating a call, an invite, some sign that I still mattered. Now, that watch had ended. I was a ghost in their polished, contemporary existence, appreciated for observing, not participating, a relic of a fading generation. The following morning, I sought refuge in the garden, tending the roses. Their fragrance was intense, an almost funereal sweetness. Each clip of the secateurs felt like severing another chord, another demand. The roses, at least, responded to my ministrations. They offered no judgment of my quietude or deliberate pace. They simply unfurled, indifferent to the seismic shifts occurring within my inner world. Later, I retreated to my study, enveloped by the comforting aroma of aged paper and latent tobacco. My fingers traced the supple leather of my grandfather's diary, a tangible link to a past more vivid than the present. He, too, had confronted obsolescence, witnessing societal upheaval following the war. His entries echoed the sentiment, a feeling of being bypassed by advancement, superseded by nimbler minds. Yet, he also chronicled finding comfort in simplicity, nature's allure, the solace of routine, the quiet fulfillment of a life deliberately lived, even without acclaim. Perhaps that was the key, not to rail against fading vitality, but to discover my own guiding lights in the encroaching obscurity. I pondered what truly sparked joy within me, not the infrequent, often pity-tinged interactions with David or Leo. No, it was the solitary pursuits, the serene moments of introspection, reading, composing, cultivating the garden, immersing myself in classical compositions. These were the activities that nourished my spirit, that imbued me with genuine vitality. Even as my physical form aged and my relevance diminished in their eyes, this realization fostered a curious sense of freedom. I craved neither their approval nor their validation. I had no need to pursue a bond that had naturally dissolved. I could simply exist, be myself, on my own schedule, by my own rules. That afternoon, I ventured to the antique emporium on the town's periphery. It was a musty, overflowing space, filled with discarded treasures and echoes of bygone eras. I lingered for hours, captivated by objects imbued with narratives. A dulled silver locket, a time-worn photograph, a handcrafted wooden box. Each held a whisper of a life lived, a memory cherished. I acquired a diminutive antique writing desk, fashioned from dense, somber wood. It boasted elaborate carvings and a leather writing surface. The proprietor recounted that it had belonged to a Victorian novelist, a woman who had embraced a quiet, unconventional existence, crafting stories largely unacknowledged in her time. As I drove homeward, the desk secured in the vehicle's rear, I experienced a renewed sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. This desk would become my haven, my sanctuary, a space where I could weave my own tales, not for external consumption, but for my own fulfillment. Stories of the past, of the present, of the future I envisioned for myself. That evening, I settled on the porch, observing the sunset. The firmament blazed with vibrant hues, a passionate farewell to the day. I savored my whiskey, the familiar warmth permeating my being. Stars began to emerge, faint glimmers in the deepening twilight. I understood that I didn't require David's brilliant, ostentatious existence, his social gatherings, and his accomplishments. I possessed my own celestial sphere, my own constellations. Smaller, perhaps less dazzling, but uniquely mine. And in their hushed, unwavering light, I discovered an inner tranquility I hadn't known was attainable. Melancholy persisted, an underlying current in my life, but it no longer felt like a crushing burden. It was simply integrated, a reminder of both what I had relinquished and what I had acquired, a reminder that even as life waned, beauty remained to be unearthed, narratives to be recounted, and personal stars to be located. I was alone. Undeniably, but solitude, I was beginning to appreciate, was not synonymous with desolation. It provided space, a blank slate upon which to compose my own interpretation of contentment, and perhaps, just perhaps, that was sufficient. Perhaps it was abundantly so.